Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Director General, Human Resources, Ministry of the Public Service, and the Director of the Learning and Development Directorate, I extend a warm welcome to you this morning to this presentation on awarding retirement benefits under the Pensions Act, CAP 25. I am Jeanette King, Human Resource Officer at the Learning and Development Directorate, and your moderator for this session. Now, you will have noticed mentioned in the advertisement for this webinar a collaboration between the Learning and Development Directorate. Regretfully, however, due to some recent and unexpected developments which impacted our colleagues at the National Union of Public Workers, we were unable to follow through with our initial agenda. For this, the Learning and Development Directorate and the National Union of Public Workers extend our sincerest apologies. Nonetheless, I am certain that the information that will be shared with you this morning, you will find is very valuable. Please note that the session is being recorded and the recording will be made available to you on the Learning and Development Directorate's YouTube channel. Our presenter this morning is Mr. Mark Hurley, whom I will formally introduce to you after I brief you on the guidelines for participation in the webinar. Other than the presenters and my voice, you may occasionally hear that of our producer, Ms. Judy Welch, Senior Human Resource Officer at the Learning and Development Directorate. Colleagues, here are the guidelines for your participation. We would need you to keep your microphones muted and your cameras turned off. This helps to ensure that bandwidth is preserved so that connectivity is not compromised. Pause and/or minimize distractions as much as possible. As you ingest this important information, please take time to reflect on your own experiences and jot down your notes, prepare your questions and comments. We will be using the chat box to communicate, so you can post those burning questions and comments in the chat. There will be a few intermittent questions during the course of the discussion, which you will be invited to respond to in the chat. And there will also be a poll launched where during the mid-session, where you were required to respond to some questions based on the information that our presenter will share. At the end of the presentation, there will be a questions and answer segment. During the Q&A, or even before, you can place your questions in the chat and they will be shared with a presenter who will respond by audio. A link of the Learning and Development Directorate's participant feedback form will be placed in the chat towards the end of the webinar. And we would really appreciate that you complete and submit the form. Colleagues, allow me to introduce our presenter. Mr. Mark Hurley, our presenter, is currently acting Senior Human Resource Officer at the Ministry of the Public Services, People Resourcing and Compliance Directorate. Mr. Hurley has been working in the field of human resource management for 23 years, and for 16 of these years, he has been addressing human resource management in the leave and pensions in the public service. Currently, Mr. Hurley manages the unit with responsibility for acting and temporary appointments for the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Environment, National Beautification, Green and Blue Economy. Welcome, Mr. Hurley, and many, many thanks to you for accepting this invitation to share this information at such a short notice. Ladies and gentlemen, I now place you in the very capable hands of Mr. Mark Hurley. Over to you, Mark.
Hi, good morning, colleagues. Thank you, Mrs. King, for your introduction. And I look forward to sharing with my colleagues in the wider public service. I know this morning we are going to cover a lot of information that some you will know, some you may not know, but at the end of it, we will be able to, our objectives, we'll be able to identify the circumstances under which retirement benefits are granted in the public service. You will be able to explain what is meant by a pension, what is meant by a gratuity, a reduced pension, a stored pension, and the abatement of pension. You will also be able to outline what is required or the process involved in awarding retirement benefits to public officers. Our topics, if you're following me on the presentation, we're going to look at a brief introduction to the Public Service Act, Cap 25, and that is the main act that governs the award of pensions in the public service. We're going to cover what is a retirement benefit. We're going to look at the key features that determine your or our eligibility for retiring benefits, the circumstances under which retirement benefits may be granted. We're going to look at those terms which I mentioned as our objectives. We're going to look at the reduced pension, the stored pension, and the abatement of pension. We're also going to discuss how retiring benefits are computed. And we're going to also cover what is required to facilitate the efficient, and we look at that word there, efficient processing of retirement benefits. All right, we're looking at the Pension Act Cap 25. Now this act is the piece of legislation or the main legislation that governs, guides, and regulates the award of retirement benefits to all public officers. And that include appointed and temporary public officers. So that one question we get is if you have to be appointed to get a pension. No, you don't have to be. It is not applicable to persons who are awarded on a contractual basis. They have their own legislation. But you will find that the Public Service Act, the Pensions Act Cap 25 also covers a few of our statutory boards, right? You may be aware that the Statutory Boards Pension Act is Cap 384, but there are those boards. QEH is one, National Housing Corporation is another. Secondary school boards, the boards like say BCC, SJPI, those all fall under Cap 25. So what we're saying is that their staff, auxiliary staff, as well as teaching staff under the secondary schools and their auxiliary staff all fall under Cap 25, right? Awarding retirement benefits. What is a retirement benefit? Can anyone, by placing it in the chat, when I ask questions, you can place your answer in the chat. Briefly say what in your determination is a retirement benefit.
Colleagues, you may go ahead and place your responses in the chat. I'll be going through the chat and sharing your responses with Mr. Hurley. Okay, we have two responses here. We have A4 saying a pension, and Gaskin Haynes saying a benefit you get only at retirement. And Brenda Ward is saying a payment made to an individual. Sorry. Oh, there. My apologies. I seem to be a payment which is made to an individual who is retired from work, and this is paid on a monthly basis. Jay Blackman says funds paid to a former employee when they retire. And we have we have an F4, saying payments made to those who have retired after a certain length of time. And Ms. Hill, Tonya is saying money is awarded at the end of your tenure in the public service. So those are some suggestions here, or a person's interpretation of what a retirement benefit is. Thank you, respondents.
Okay, thank you, Ms. King, and thank you, colleagues. As I listened, I heard answers. We can put them all together, and generally all of the answers are correct. Here is one explanation, specifically what the actual pension is. It is a monetary payment in the form, or what our actual retirement benefits is. It's a monetary payment in the form of either a pension or a gratuity that may be awarded by the government of Barbados to public officers or government employees following their retirement from the public service in respect of his or her public service. So you said it was a payment, you said it was a pension, you said you receive it on retirement from the public service. All of those answers are correct. Pension versus your gratuity. So previously we just mentioned that the retirement benefit can be in the form of a pension or a gratuity. And I heard one of the answers given that the retirement benefit is received monthly after retirement. So that specifically is referring to the pension. The pension here we see is a monthly payment to retired public officers or government employees who have completed no less than 10-year service. And I will speak to that 10-year continuous, well, it says continuous here, but I will speak to that 10-year period shortly. So who have completed no less than 10-year service. So then we say that the gratuity is a one-time payment to retired public officers or government employees who have completed more than 5 years consecutive service or 5 consecutive years service, but less than 10 years. And that is true. However, as we go on, we will see that a gratuity is also paid in conjunction with the pension, as opposed to a pension versus a gratuity. One or the other, it is paid in conjunction also with a pension. Who is eligible for retirement benefit? I just mentioned on the previous slide that you qualify for a pension on completing 10 years service. That is true. Pensionable service, you hear the term pensionable service. There are two interpretations of that. One is service for which you will be eligible for a pension, and the other is that you meet the required amount of service to receive a pension, right? So for example, I told you earlier that a contractual appointment is not pensionable. So you can be on contract 10 years, 20 years. That service is not pensionable service. So when you reach the age at which you are be eligible for the payment of a pension, you will not be eligible for such a payment, but you would have benefited differently over that period of time. So service in an established post in the public service, whether you're permanent or temporary, and service in a temporary post, that's a post that's not established, those are pensionable service. And the minimum requirement for your pensionable service to be actually awarded a pension is 10 years. Let me briefly explain that it doesn't have to be 10 years continuously. Let's say you were, put it simply, for 5 years. You left the public service and you return after, let me say, 4 years for another 5 years. Your total service is 10 or more. You would qualify for a pension over that entire period, right? And those who do not meet the minimum 10 years to receive a pension, but who have completed more than 5 years continuously, would be eligible for that ex gratia award in the form of a gratuity. Right? So we're going to consider the different circumstances which we as public officers may be awarded our retirement benefits, right? Can anyone tell me, I'm sure you're following, what is the compulsory age, or what you understand by the compulsory age of retirement? Again, you put your answers in the chat. Mrs. King will tell us what you say.
Okay, I am going through the chat. I have not. Okay, I see S Boys is given the compulsory age of retirement as 67. So is Miranda. Yeah. So basically everybody has said 67, Mr. Hurley.
Okay, thank you. That is correct. The compulsory age of retirement is 67 currently. I don't want, it was previously, all know 65, then it went to 65 and a half, 66, 66 and a half, and now it's 67. So we see that it is based on the current legislation or the legislation at the time, and therefore may be subject to change. But the compulsory age, yes, it is 67, but what is meant when we say a compulsory age? I will share some experiences with you. Of course, everyone does not enter this public service at the age of 18 or 20. Some persons may even enter the public service after they have reached the age of 50. And upon reaching the compulsory age, which is 67, then your retirement from the public service is mandatory. You cannot opt to continue working. Of course, there are a couple of caveats to that, which I may mention if I get the chance. So from my experience, there were persons who, on reaching the compulsory age, fell short of the 10-year minimum requirement for pension. And I would explain further. I'll give you more information about that. But those persons are, from my experience, persons would have asked if they can continue working for another 2 years or 3 years, whatever, to meet the minimum requirement, or even to meet the pensionable service maximum, or which the 33 and the 30 years, which is the pensionable service for public officers. And unfortunately, any service, even if your compulsory age is missed, which has happened before. In other words, sometimes we come across persons who are working and they are beyond the age of 67. What happens though is that nothing that happens, or none of your service after the point where you reach 67 will be used when computing your retirement benefits, right? So if you for whatever reason put on another 3 years, you would have received salary for that period, but it would not be counted when computing your gratuity at that point in time, right? So what we as public officers should be mindful of is when we're approaching either the voluntary age or compulsory age of retirement, especially those who process retirement benefits or personnel matters, should be aware of the age of the persons who work within their department so they can advise them properly and appropriately about their options, right? You wouldn't want to show up today to work and be told, oh, you have to go off with immediate effect, as has happened more than once in the public service, right? We try to avoid that. So yes, you're correct. The compulsory age of retirement is 67. The voluntary age, um, I'm sure most of us are aware, is the age of 60. Um, However, there are some persons for whom the voluntary age of retirement is 55. Um, those persons who can retire at 55 would be persons who were permanently appointed to the service on or before the 15th of July, 1985, right? And you tend to find that mostly policemen fall in that category. The reason being, when you enlist as a constable, you are a permanent officer. And generally, all other public officers serve a temporary period before they become permanently appointed, right? So any police officer who enlisted as a constable prior to the date, the 15th of July, 1985, would have the option to retire at 55. So there's still some officers around. So anytime I see someone retiring before 60 and they're not going out, say like medically unfit, then I assume they're a police officer. The only category that generally can retire before the voluntary age of 60 at the between the voluntary age of 55 and 60, right? Officers who are killed in the line of duty. Like we said, these are the circumstances under which retirement benefits are awarded. If it is unfortunate that an officer dies or is killed rather in the line of duty, then their estate or their dependents can be awarded the retirement benefits in the form of a pension, right, as well as the gratuity. Again, these persons tend to be police officers or fire officers whose actual duties, the actual nature of their job tends to be hazardous. But a clerical officer sitting in an office, that is not hazardous in any way. It might sometimes be negative if you sit all day long to your health, but it's not a hazardous profession. So you would tend to find persons who are writing or typing on a computer being killed in the line of duty. All right. So again, that generally applies to police officers and in some cases fire officers because of the nature of their jobs. In that situation, the estate is eligible for a pension or the dependents, because it's not only the estate. If the officer has a wife, they are eligible for a pension, and any children are eligible for a pension, right? Another circumstance under which we as public officers can be awarded retirement benefits before reaching the voluntary age, in this case, is on medical grounds. This is where, for whether because of infirmity of body or mind, you are no longer able to execute your job, right? And therefore, you'll be referred to the medical board. It's not a automatic something or compulsory. You go to the medical board and they would make a determination on your fitness for further employment in the public service, right? When that happens, if they so determined and you're retired on medical grounds, let's say you're 30 or 35 or 40, at that point you would receive your retiring benefits. Okay.
Okay, Mark, we have someone asking, what about prison officers? I think this is in relation to officer killed
And the
in
line of
line of
duty.
duty.
Right. I did not necessarily exclude prison officers, but the nature of their job is also dangerous. But I did not like exclude them. They can be included because of the nature of their job. Um, it's I can't recall ever having the case of a prison officer dying in the line of duty, right? Being killed in the line of duty. But that is also a hazardous job, and yes, they can be included. I wouldn't want to be included in the category, but they could be included in that category under those circumstances. That is satisfactory, I hope. Uh,
Thank you,
um,
Mark.
right.
Thanks.
Okay. Um, on the abolition of an officer's post, you can or may also be awarded um, retirement benefits. Right? There's a let me explain it. Let's say your post for whatever reason, and included or often included with this is the also the phrase reorganization of the department or ministry or department. So if your post is abolished or your ministry is reorganized to the fact that your job is no longer needed, you can be awarded your retirement benefits early, but that is dependent upon, let's say there's a comparable post to your substantive position, and you are offered a position and you refuse, then in that circumstances, I'm not going to tell you you cannot be awarded, but each case is done on a case by case basis. So if we have 20 officers whose posts are abolished, it is possible that some would be awarded their retirement benefits early and others would not, based on the circumstances. For sure, one of those circumstances is if you are offered a reasonable or comparable position where any reasonable person in that situation would accept, but you refuse, you may not be awarded the retirement benefits in that circumstances. But abolition of post is another one. And then we see death in service. Death in service is different from an officer being killed in the line of duty. Um, Death in service, you can die at home or doing any other thing, but that simply means that you die while you are still a public officer, right? So you're still an employee, but you fall ill, for example, let's say to COVID, and you die, then you have died in service. And in this case, your estate is awarded a gratuity. We call that gratuity a commuted gratuity. So basically, it is the same gratuity that the public officer would have received based on their current length of service and their current pensionable emoluments if they had been eligible for the award of their retirement awards at that point in time. So that is what the estate gets in the case of an officer who dies in service. Okay. So we're going to look now at a couple of terms. I don't think I mentioned these terms prior. Yeah, I think there were, or one of them might have been listed in the objectives. Right. Um, a reduced pension, a stored pension, and abatement of pension. 3 terms. From my experience, there are cases where persons are confused, especially by the first term, a reduced pension, right? I just want to say that if you have any questions, um, which I haven't posted to you for an answer, you can always put them in the chat. Mrs. King will make me or will notify me that you have asked a question, right? So when we look at the term a reduced pension, what are we talking about? We're talking about the fact that you receive a monthly payment which is less than your full pension, but you also receive a gratuity or a lump sum payment, right? If it's confusing, I'll spend a little more time on this one. So, and I will give you the formula a little later when we look at the steps involved in processing the retiring awards. So basically, you can opt to receive a full pension. When you retire, and I'll show you this a little later on, there's what we call an option or option form, which all public officers are required to sign to state whether they opt for a full pension or they are going to opt for the gratuity and a reduced pension, right? So the full pension is where you only get a pension, and the reduced pension is where you opt to receive a lump sum as well as slightly smaller monthly payments. And I'll ask you to put any questions relating to this one in the chat so that Ms. King can see them. If I'm not clear, just put your questions in the chat. So I'll just repeat, in basic terms, when you opt for reduced pension, you're opting to receive a gratuity and slightly smaller monthly payments, right? So for example, if your full pension, monthly pension was $2,000 every month, and you opt for a reduced pension, then your reduced pension will be $1,500 every month. But in addition to that, you would get a lump sum payment, which you would not have gotten if you had opted to get the larger payments every month. Like I said, if that's not clear, just ask your questions in the chat.
Okay, Mark, I don't see any questions in the chat so far.
Okay.
We have other questions which I will share with you during the Q&A.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
All right, so a stored pension. Earlier up, we mentioned that the compulsory age of retirement is 67, and the voluntary age of retirement can be 60 or 55, as the case may be. So what happens when we talk about a stored pension? Let's say you, as a public officer, you have other opportunities and you decide to resign from the public service at the age of 40. We just said that the voluntary age can be 55, 60, and the compulsory age is 67. So you're not at any of these ages, and therefore you're not eligible to receive your retirement benefits. So what happens? In some cases, I can tell you that nothing happens, but in other cases, we prepare what is called a stored pension. That is, we do the exact same process as if you are retiring voluntarily from the public service. Prepare all of the same documents, the same information, and we submit that application to the accountant general, and it goes through the same process, but it is not completed. It is held until you reach the voluntary age of retirement, at which time you would be awarded your pension, your gratuity. So that is the difference, right? Your stored pension is when we prepare your application on your leaving the public service before being eligible to receive your retirement awards, and it is stored or held until you reach the age of retirement, the voluntary age. And there are some stored pensions from as far back as the early 80s or late 70s, because at that time, if you do it, it eliminates a lot of problems later on. For example, imagine you had resigned from the service in 1983, and you now come and all of the persons you work with no longer are retired already, no longer working. Um, the records, for whatever reason, were not kept properly. Then you have problems getting your application completed. So even if you were 35 today and you resign, when persons resign, we write a letter when we accept your resignation and we ask you to supply, if you qualify, we ask you to supply the relevant documentation. And I can tell you that it is somewhat difficult. You very seldom get replies from the actual public officer themselves um, to supply these required documents. Some cases, because we also request from the ministry or department the application for the stored pension. In most cases, those are submitted, but you find that it's the public officer themselves who does not supply the other supporting documentation. And then we have no choice but to wait until you contact us if we have no means of contacting you in the interim, right? So we're looking now, we're going to talk about the abatement of a pension. So the compulsory age of retirement is 67. How is this related to the abatement of pension? To explain it in simple terms, a pension for most public officers is currently only payable for 7 years or 8 years upon right. I 60 to that there for 8 years. That is from age 60 to 67. And there are those persons who, because of the date on which they enter the public service, will be eligible for a continued payment of pension beyond the age of 67, right? And those are persons who enter the public service on or before the 1st of September 1975. And you do not have to be an appointed public officer at the time. You just have to have entered the public service on or before that date. Let's say you were a substitute and you subbed for 2 weeks in August 1975, and then you did not work again until 1985, you still qualify for that pension to be paid beyond the age of 67. But what happens in other cases where those public officers enter the service after the 1st of September 1975, which is in most cases no, right? On reaching 67, the NIS scheme takes over payment, or you apply there for your NIS contributory pension. And whether you apply or not, at reaching 67, the Treasury will cease payment of their pension. That's in the case where you enter the service after the 1st of September 1975. And there is some liaison between the Treasury and the National Insurance Department regarding the payment of pensions. So where you do not apply, the Treasury will cease payment, right? But in the cases where the National Insurance Department begins to pay you, they would inform the Treasury that they're paying you a pension. And this is where abatement occurs. So it's either your full pension from the Treasury will stop or part of it will stop. And I will explain. In cases where the pension which you would receive from the National Insurance Department is less than the pension you are being paid by the Treasury would abate their pension by the amount you're receiving from National Insurance Department. So if they were paying you $1,000 and NAS is going to pay you $800, the Treasury would continue to pay you $200. So they would have abated their pension by $800. In the cases where the NAS amount is equal, then the Treasury will stop the full amount if it's equal or more. So there is where the pension is abated, right? So as long as you don't qualify for a payment of a pension beyond the age of 67, your pension from the Treasury would be abated, and you would need to apply an appropriate time to the National Insurance Department to have your pension start at 67. And Mrs. King, we're at the midpoint, and at this point, we're just going to give you the opportunity to ask. Well, we're going to ask you some questions first, and then we give you opportunity for discussion. So I'll hand you over to Ms. King at this time. We're going to be asking 3 questions, so she's going to be assisting.
Okay.
I think there are 5 questions we're going to be asking. Right.
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
Mhm.
So I will
Okay.
ask the question. When you're ready, let me know when you're ready, Ms. King.
Okay, I will launch the poll now, Mark, so participants can see those questions in the poll. So we have the first question. True and false. A retired officer who has completed 10 or more years continuous service is eligible for a pension. True or false? Okay, we have the responses coming in, and I will end the poll in just a second. And the poll is ended, and it's looking like a 100% are saying true. So I will share
Right.
those results with you.
That answer is true. A retired person who has completed 10 or more years. I think I explained it earlier on that it's not necessary to say continuous because it can be broken. But at least the part of that service has to be at least 5 years continuous service, right? But it is the framing of the question, the answer is true, right? So you're correct.
Thank you, participants. Thank you, Mark. I am now going to share the next question with you. Okay, my device is giving a little problem. Just a moment, please. And there we have the next question. A reduced pension involves the payment of a gratuity followed by monthly payments of the pension. Is this true or false? And we have the answers coming in already. Okay, we'll see what happens at the end. Okay. I'm going to end the poll now and share those results with you. So far, I am seeing 94% versus 6%. A, 94% for true. B, false, 6%. What say you, Mr. Hurley?
Okay, for this question, the answer will be true. But let me clarify for those who may have missed it or may not have fully understood, right? So I said the full pension is where you opt for the full amount that you receive monthly. So you only opt in for the monthly payment, right? So a reduced pension is where you opt for slightly smaller monthly payments, but you also receive a lump sum. So this question is true. A reduced pension involves the payment of a gratuity, which is a lump sum, followed by monthly payments of the pension, right?
Thank you, Mr. Hurley. On to our next question. So that question, abatement of pension occurs when receive the public service pension and the national insurance pension. Abatement of pension occurs when you receive the public service pension and the national insurance pension. So I see some responses coming in. We'll see what happens at the end. We just have about 2 more seconds, participant, for you to make your selection. Okay, so I'm seeing here about 63% saying true and 38% saying false. And what say you, Mr. Hurley?
Well, I noticed that the question on the slide and the question in the poll are slightly different, right? If you see what I mean. So I'm not sure if that confuse the answer, because the question and the poll, abatement of pension occurs when you receive, I think I was missing, the public service pension and NAS pension. So I can see where a person would be confused because though that is not abatement of pension, that is when it occurs. It would occur at that point. But if I can clarify for you, I think this is one of the last things I spoke about. If you enter the service after the 1st of September 1975, abatement of pension would occur when you begin to receive your NAS pension. So in other words, I shouldn't even say as long as you're 67, your pension from the Treasury would be abated, and that is in conjunction with the payment of your national insurance pension, right? So those who answered, I would say those who answered true, like I said, Ms. King, the wording of the question is slightly different. I'm not sure if you can see what I mean.
Okay, I am checking this. This says abatement of pension means that if you were employed on a continuous basis in the public service before 1975, you would receive a public service pension and a
And
national
national
insurance
insurance
pension.
pension.
Oh, yes, I do
Right,
see where
right,
the error has occurred. My
correct,
apologies, colleagues, but
right.
this was
So
perhaps something that was supposed to have been changed.
right. So the question on the slide would be false, but I can see where a person, based on interpretation, some persons would say true, or most persons would say true to the question in the poll. Yeah.
Right. My apologies again, colleagues.
And there's 2 other questions. Let me bring them up.
Okay, I am going to launch the other questions now. And this one it says rather, retirement benefit is granted for death in the service, voluntary retirement, medical grounds, and secondment. So colleagues, your turn to respond. I am going to end the poll in just a second. So there we have, so far, we are seeing that 44% are given a true response to this and 56% are given a response to this question. Mr. Hurley, what do you say?
This question, the correct answer is false. Other than compulsory requirement for other circumstances in which retirement benefits may be granted, or well, again, it's slightly different from the pool, but it says the same thing: death in service, voluntary retirement, medical grounds, and secondment. So secondment is not one of the circumstances in which retirement benefits may be paid, right? So comment, if we understand the term, is when you are employed or seconded to another agency from your substantive position.
Okay, so our final question now in the poll. An officer must complete at least 5 years of full-time service, but no more than 10 in a pensionable post to receive a gratuity. And the responses are coming in. We have some persons seen as though they are kind of iffy on this one, but we see what happens at the end of the poll. And that will be in just about 2 seconds. Okay, and the poll is ended and we have a tie, 50-50. What is your response, Mr. Hurley?
Okay, an officer, I'm reading from the poll, must complete at least 5 years of full-time service, but no more than 10 in a pensionable post to receive a gratuity. No more than, I'm thinking that the interpretation of the question may be what chose some person. But the question will tend to be true if we word it slightly different. I will say an officer must complete at least 5 years of full-time service, right? And when we say no more than 10, that is like being a requirement. So you must complete at least 5 years of full-time service. And if you complete less than 10, you're only eligible to receive that gratuity, right? So the answer for this question should be true.
Okay. Thank you, participants. Thank you, Mr. Hurley. So we can proceed.
Okay, we thank you for participating in our brief quiz. Like I said prior, if you are unclear on any of the topics we have covered, just put your questions in the chat, and I'm sure at the end we have a brief session where we can get to discuss anything that is not clear. We're processing retirement benefits. Right, so earlier up, I mentioned the formula which is used for computing retiring awards or retirement benefits, right? And you see here, we mentioned a full pension, we mentioned reduced pension, we mentioned gratuity. So we've presented for you the formula which you can use to determine your full pension, your reduced pension, your gratuity, etc. I explained the full pension as when you opt for only your monthly payments. However, when computing retirement benefits, they're done on the annual amount. So when we compute them, we will be computing your annual full pension or your annual reduced pension, right? And then you break it down into the monthly payments. So the first part of the formula here is where we can compute or you can compute your, once you have the required information, full annual full pension. So let me read this, the first one for you. It says the number of years converted to months divided by 600 and multiplied by the last annual salary, right? Again, put your queries in the chat. Number of years converted to months. I'll ask a question here. Can anyone tell me, or does anyone know the full pensionable service? And I'll give you a hand, 33 and a third years in months. So a pensionable service is 33 and a third years. Does anyone know what that is in months?
Okay, have some responses here. Joanne Black Jarvis is saying 400. That is 400 months. We have Chanel also saying 400 months. Also Deborah. So basically everyone has
Right. So
proposed 400 months.
everyone is correct. So your pensionable service, 33 and a third years, is equivalent to 400 months. So where we see in the formula, it would be written as 400 over 600 multiplied by your annual salary, right? And the answer you would get is your annual full pension, right? So in order to compute your annual reduced pension, we see the formula here as written. You would as like a word problem, you substitute the words, the numbers for the words, and you would work it out, right? But I'll put it in very simple terms so that everyone, I'm sure, would understand. Whatever your annual full pension is, your annual reduced pension is 3/4 of that, right? So you will recall in an example I gave earlier up, I said if your monthly full pension was $2,000, then your monthly reduced pension will be $1,500, which is 3/4 of the 2,000. So that is very simple. And there's no need to be confused with the writing out an extended formula. Once you work out your annual full pension, you know automatically that your annual reduced pension is 3/4 of that. And then to get your monthly payments, you simply divide by 12 because you're making 12 installments. So you divide it by 12, right? I hope that is very clear. So then what do we do with that quarter that we take? We leave you with a 3/4 of your full pension as a reduced pension. But what do we do with that 1/4 that we take? We use that quarter to compute your gratuity, right? So then whatever you receive as your full pension, you'll take 1/4 of that and you multiply it by 12.5, right? So the formula basically remains the same, but then you just add on, and then you add on again to the end of the formula. But not to be confusing, 1/4 by 12.5 would give you, and this is of the annual full pension, would give you your gratuity. And I hope that is quite clear, right? And below, we also have the formula for the ex gratia award or the gratuity. This is where you do not meet the requirement for monthly pension, right? So then you are awarded a gratuity that is 5 times what your annual full pension would have been had you qualified for a pension. So you still do you're not qualified for a pension. We still calculate the full pension based on the number of years you have completed, but then we multiply that by 5 so that you still benefit somewhat even if you do not qualify for a pension, right? So I hope that part was clear. If not, we will discuss it some more when you get to ask your questions. I know we're going to look at actually processing the return or preparing, like say, the application and what is required so that we can efficiently, and I pointed out that word earlier up, efficient. We want to use that word when we're processing retirement benefits. So in other words, we do not want that you retire the 1st of September, but you by the 1st of November, you still have not received your retirement benefits. We want that if you're retiring the 1st of November, that during the month of August, everything is completed and waiting for you, right? So we want you as public officers. I mentioned earlier that some persons continue to work beyond the compulsory age of retirement. There are a few cases where that can actually, or that is actually allowed, right? And I will mention them briefly. But when you consider your retirement, we don't want that. You will say, this is August, and you're going to say, I want to retire from the 1st of September. Of course, you can do that, but with the understanding that at the 1st of September, that there's no way that your retirement awards will be ready for payment. So we ask that you give as early notification as possible, and we advise that you give at least 6 months notification of your intent to retire, right? That should give the department enough time to prepare your application, submit it to the People Resources and Compliance Directorate for it to go through the process. And we'll show you that process a little later on, right? It is also important that all of your records are kept accurately. I tend to advise persons to keep their letters when they receive authorities, especially for your temporary service, because the practice was over the years that as a temporary officer, especially in the general service, which includes posts like clerical officer, stenographer, typist, those kind of posts, you tend to move around a lot. And therefore your records are not kept as especially your temporary records in one place. When you're appointed, you don't tend to have as much of an issue because we at People Resources and Compliance will keep a file of all of your records from that point forward. But as a temporary officer, your records wouldn't be as compiled in one place and therefore maybe more difficult to get. So you try to keep your letters so that you will have them to cover any temporary service that you had. And then we also want that the ministries and departments complete the application as accurately as possible, right? And we say, as I said up front, with enough time, submitted with enough time, we said 6 months prior to the date of retirement. So what do we want? We want early notification, accurate records, accurate completed form, and early submission of the application, right? That would alleviate a lot of problems in preparing the application. And I hope you can see I hope you can see the application. right? I hope you can see it. So this is the form that is completed when you are retiring from the public service. And the form is completed by your department or your ministry. The officer does not complete the form, right? There are some cases where you might, if you're the officer responsible for preparing applications in your department, you might complete your own form, but you wouldn't sign off on it, right? So apart from that, officers, because there were cases I know where persons would come to PRC and ask for a form because they want to retire, but it is prepared by your ministry or department. And I hope you can see at the very part one, it's divided into 4 parts. Each part may have a number of sections or just one section. So part one has it's up to 22 sections. And the first section, you will determine what cap the pension is going to be awarded under. And generally, it's going to be cap 25, right? Teachers have a cap there, but teachers are on their cap 25. And you hardly find any public officers currently working on the cap 30. And there are generally no persons who fall on the cap 20 currently working. But you would still find persons on the cap 20 and even may find them on the cap 30, but these are persons who would have left the service under those caps. So you tend to find that at the 1st of December 1998, all of the casual employees were converted to public officers or should have been converted to public officers. But if you had resigned prior to that date as a casual employee, and you are now reaching the age where you are eligible for payment of your retirement awards, it will be awarded on the cap 20 because that was the cap that was applicable when you left the service, right? But in most cases, it is cap 25 that is used. And it is fairly straightforward to complete. Name of the applicant. So you put in the name, you try to get updated or current address. One of the things we find that many public officers or departments and ministries do not have updated addresses for their employees, right? So you try to get updated address. The office or situation will be the post in which you occupy. This can be your substantive post, and also if you're acting and you're acting for the required period of time, which is at least 36 months continuously, then you would also include the acting position, right? So that is your office or situation. A date of birth explains itself, and the age at the date of retirement. If you resign from the service, then you complete the form at the time, you would put in the age at the date of resignation, right? And 7 of the form, these are the circumstances we would have covered some of them under which you are awarded your retirement benefits. Age limit here refers to the compulsory age. We have the medical grounds, voluntary retirement, permission granted by the form has to be updated. There are a number of forms that we use which have to be updated, right? So this still says Governor General, and it is still used right now because it has not been officially replaced. The day the appointment ceases will be the last day of your employment. The cessation of salary would also be the last day of your employment. But let's say you had applied for a no-pay leave for 2 years prior to your retirement. Then the date your salary ceases would be 2 years prior to the date your appointment ceases, right? Then at 10, that would be the date from which your pension or gratuity should be paid, right? So section 11, you would include the salaries or your pensionable emoluments. Right. So your pensionable emoluments is generally your annual salary. However, if you are receiving allowances which are pensionable, you would also include them in this section. And 13 would be your pensionable service. You recall I spoke about pensionable service very early on, and I categorized it into service which will be counted for pensionable purposes, and then service which meets the requirement in terms of length of time. So 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 if your service here is less than 10, you're still eligible for retirement benefits if you have 5 years service, but you wouldn't be awarded a pension. What happens if you work 46 years? I've come across quite a few persons who've worked that length of time. Your retiring awards or benefits are still only computed on 33 and a third years, right? So that would be 400 months or 33 years and 4 months. so 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 if you complete 40 years, still 33 and a third years, right? So be mindful of that. That is one question we get asked often. Another question concerning the service is, if I have completed 33 and a third year service, do I still have to work to 60? Yes, if as the case may be, you still have to work until you reach the voluntary age of retirement, whether you complete the 33 and the 30 years at let's say 50 or 52 or something like that. So I spoke about keeping accurate records, and at part 13 or section 13 of part 1, you would list the person's service. So this is in effect the person's service record. Let's say you entered as a temporary clerical officer, you would put in the post, the title, the date you started as a temporary officer. Then if you were appointed clerical officer, you put the date which you were appointed, the date of termination, and that column will be the last date before you became a permanent officer. And if then you were promoted to, like, say, a senior clerk, then you will put in the date of appointment as senior clerk. The date of termination for the clerical officer post will be the date before you were appointed senior clerk. And it continues that way for all promotions. You list the service there, and you would list the person's acting if the acting is consequential to the award of their retirement benefits. So if the acting occurs within the last 5 years, you can list it completely, but be mindful that for your acting service to be used, you have to be acting at least 36 months continuously, which is 3 years immediately preceding your retirement, or for at least 36 months within the last 5 years. In that case, you would get what we call a average computation. So in other words, they will compute you take an average of the emoluments you receive over the last 3 years, and they will compute your retirement benefits on that. So then the next thing we do is we list all of your no pay service, whether you have sick leave without pay, whether you apply for leave of absence without pay, you have study leave without pay, no pay leave to work or secondment, it is all recorded at section 14 of part 1. And then we go over to the back of the form. So these sections which are shown, like I said, the print is kind of fine. But generally you take yes and most of these, but I think you generally know would be 19. Yeah, if the applicant has been guilty of any grave offense committed, usually that is no at the time of retirement, usually. Most of the others, and I think no would also be B of that, if the person rendered unsatisfactory service, but the others would tend to be yes. And if you contributed to the widows and children scheme, mostly no, that is no. And if the person has any outstanding debts to government, that's in terms of like you have overdrawn salary, you have a training loan, a vehicle loan. Those would all be listed here. But for 21D, which is where you would list overdrawn salary, you would put a total there, but you have to break down any overdrawn salary. So that said, an officer has an overdrawn salary of $12,000. You would list 12,000 there, but then you would break it down like the person owes $3,000 for January, 3,000 for February, 3,000 for March. So you break it down by month, so that the treasury can follow how the overdrawn salary was incurred. And this is an important part. Some forms come in without the signature of the head of department or the signature of the PS. Or one section here, both 19 and 22 are to be signed. Sometimes only one is signed, right? And that holds up the award of the pension, because sometimes we would have to send back that form to get it signed, or ask for a new form which is signed at both parts to be submitted. And the other sections of the form are completed by the Accountant General, signed by the Auditor General, and then signed by the President. So if you're responsible for preparing the document, you will try to get this information to be accurate as possible. And so we've completed the application for retirement benefits, and we need to supply the supporting documents. So we need a certified copy, and that's important, of the original certificates, right? So if you submit your birth certificate to the department and they take a copy, they must indicate either by stamp or signing on the copy that the original birth certificate was seen. And that applies to any other certificate, marriage, decree absolute, death certificate. And the death certificate will be submitted. Remember, we said that one of the circumstances are two, where one being killed in the line of duty or death in service. And in those cases, a death certificate will be submitted by the estate or dependents. And ID card, a copy of, most persons now submit a copy of their ID card. Additional supporting documents, I would have mentioned these up front, approvals letters, which will be like your authorities or your temporary or acting appointment letters, letters of transfer, secondment, promotions, resignations. All of them have to be supplied or attached to your application. In most cases, they would be on your file once you're appointed. But like I said before, you have to make sure that your temporary service is accounted for. And most persons who work in established posts, when you're appointed, your letter tend to say that you were appointed with effect from this date, but your temporary service was, and it would give the date of your temporary employment, which covers most of your temporary service, but in some cases, not all of your temporary service. So we have also a service record and affidavit. These are important. Service records usually apply to casual service. So let's say you started working in 1993 as a casual general worker, and you are retiring now. Even though you are in an established post, the service prior to the 1st of December 1998 must be covered by a service record, right? And we're not going into actually structuring the service record in this format, but I think most persons should be aware. If not, you can just ask the question in the chat: how do you prepare a service record? And we will submit that information to you. So the service record is applicable for casual service. There are a couple of posts which you would use a service record for even after the 1st of December 1998. Those posts are the relief watchman, a part-time maid. Those two, you would still need to provide a service record because we still have relief watchmen working and we still have part-time maids. And they do not work regular hours or full-time hours like other employees. Right, when I was reviewing the form, I indicated that at part or section 14 of part 1, you record all no pay leave, right? So that is where you record all no pay leave, and no pay leave is not going to be counted as pensionable service. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. So let's say you have 35 years service. You were on study leave for 4 years without pay. So that is 4 years that will be subtracted from that 35 years, which would leave you with, let's say, just about 31 years pensionable service. So any no pay leave is not pensionable. And if you were like say 40 years, 45 years, it may be irrelevant, inconsequential. But if your service is let's say exactly 33 and 30 years or less, any no pay would tend to reduce the amount of your pensionable benefits, right? And personal emoluments would be for most of us it's salary alone, but for others it would also include pensionable allowances. And remember, I mentioned when we were talking about the reduced pension and the gratuity that you have an option. And right now on the slide is a copy of the option form. Now, based on the legislation and how the Pension Act is written, it is an option. But let's say almost 100%. Since I've been working, I only know of one person who voluntarily signed the option for a full pension, and I do not believe that they understood, despite it being explained to them, what the option they were signing is. So the option, it is an option, but really it should be automatic that you receive a reduced pension and a gratuity. Some persons use maths and try to figure out that over a period of time, a full pension would end up being more than opting for a lump sum and a reduced pension. But if you opt for a reduced pension and gratuity on the first day of your retirement, depending on your scale, you go home with a sizable lump sum that you otherwise would not have received. Right, so we're going to go and look at, I mentioned the steps involved in processing the retirement awards. We have 7 steps that we're going to share with you. These are the main steps or the key steps in the process of your application for retirement awards. The step 1, and we mentioned it briefly, the retirement officer, they're assisted by the Human Resource Department in completing the retirement awards application. Or rather, the Human Resource Department, yes, they act on behalf of the retirement officer. So they assist, they will inform you or should inform you of everything you need to supply, and they would complete the application on your behalf. The Human Resource Department will then submit that application to PRC, which is People Resourcing and Compliance Directorate. And what we do there is we make sure that all of the information that I would have just went over briefly, the application, all of the attachments, all of the supporting documents are accurate and are attached. I pause briefly. I mentioned the supporting documents. This is like, for example, some public officers use a name, or when we look at their birth certificate, the name they're using is not the name on the birth certificate. That creates an issue, right? So what you should do is try to use the name that you were born with that shows up on the birth certificate. or you get your name changed officially by deed poll, or you have an affidavit of identity prepared, which will say that you and the name, your name and the other name you're using are one and the same person ahead of time, because that is one of the issues that tend to hold up pensions, where persons tend to either spell the name differently or use a name that does not show up on the birth certificate. Right. So those are things that we are checking for when we receive your application for retirement awards. After we check and we are satisfied that everything is in order, then we submit your application to the Accountant General, that will be the Treasury Department, and they will do the computation of your retirement awards. And after that, the Auditor General will certify that the computation is correct. So the file goes to the Treasury. It also goes to the Audit Department, and the audit makes sure that everything, they will check everything that we check and everything that the Treasury did, right? On completion, being certified correct, your application is returned to PRC, and it would go to the appropriate service commission. For most of us, that would be the Administrative, General, and Professional Service Commission. For persons who were in the, what we call the protective services, that would be the Protective Services Commission, and those would be police officers, fire officers, customs, immigration officers, prison officers, and security guards, and also customs guards, right? So those would be the main commissions, but of course we also have the Judicial and Legal Service Commission, right? Once the commission approves payment of your retirement awards, it is sent to the president for her signature, and on that is the very last act that occurs on your, in the process of your retiring, of awarding your retirement benefits, the signature of the president. And on return of the file to PRC, it is forwarded to the Treasury for payment. So that is the process. And it seems like if it's only 7 steps, but based on what occurs at each stage, it could be a lengthy or extended process. So key to having it completed, to my mind, the most important thing is accurate information, right? And that would be the last point we were going to cover, the key steps involved in processing retirement benefits. Right, but I think I mentioned earlier up that there were persons who can work beyond 67, and basically that would be like a watchman. At 67, they would still need to retire, but then they can be rehired as a relief watchman, and that additional service is not pensionable. You have persons who retire from the nursing profession who come back in as sessional or on contract, and then they can work beyond 67, but the additional service is not pensionable. And right, so basically those 2 categories of public officers, and in some cases you see teachers who have retired coming back on contract as well. So if you have any questions in the chat, I'll hand you over to Miss King, and she will direct what happens from this point onward. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope we covered each topic to a satisfactory level, that you've gained more than you came with. And of course, we are always accessible to you if you need to make any queries, because that is our role to assist the public officers as they sojourn in the public service. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hurley. We have quite a few questions, but unfortunately, I do not believe we will be able to answer all of them for you right now. But those questions which are unanswered in this forum, we will be sending you the responses via email, and Mr. Hurley will do his best, or he'll endeavor to get those answers to you within a week of this presentation. So we're just going to take a few questions. And the first one, Mr. Hurley, we have from Arlie. Arlie Jewett is asking, if those persons who take voluntary retirement as opposed to compulsory, what is the financial loss if you take the voluntary retirement? Well,
On mute, on mute, on mute.
Mark, you were muted.
Yeah, you can hear me now?
Yes, 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 we
You're
can.
right. Oh, sorry about that. Right. I was saying there is no financial loss. Remember that the posts in the public service are all paid salary on scalar, so that whether you are in the same post or not, as long as you're in the same skill, you've completed the same amount of years service, your retirement benefits will be the same. So if you retire at the voluntary age and you have completed 33 and a third years, as some person goes to the compulsory age, and they're in the same position at the same scale or equivalent positions at the same scale, you would receive the same benefit. But as we pointed out earlier, at 67, if you're not eligible for the continued payment of your pension, you may retire and only receive the gratuity from the Treasury, while the person who retires voluntarily would receive a pension from the Treasury along with their gratuity until they reach 67 or apply for their NAS pension. So that is something that some persons need to be aware of. If you retire at the compulsory age and you do not qualify for the two pensions, then you only receive the gratuity at that point and no pension, right? So really, if you retire at the voluntary age, the only consideration that would affect your retirement benefits is the your length of service at that point in time, right? So let's say you have 33 and a third, and the other person only have 25. They can decide that they're going to also retire, but when they check um their retirement awards, they must understand that because of their length of service, it would be less than the person who completed the 33 and a third. That's the main variable, your length of service at the point in time where you retire.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Arlijuan, for your question. Colleagues, the feedback form has been now placed in the chat. You can go right ahead and click on the link and complete the feedback form. We have a question from CD, who asks, is there a minimum or maximum time that you can break service? I am not certain, but Mark, can you answer that one?
Let's say you started working in 1983, and you came in, you worked in 95, you resigned for whatever reason, and as long as you have time remaining in terms of that, let's say you're 55, you re-enter the service in 2015. That's a 20-year break, but you can re-enter the service at any point with the understanding that you can only work to 67, right? So if you re-enter the service at 65, you can only complete another 3 years. But if you were to re-enter the service at 55, you can complete, now that is about 12 years before you have to retire. So no, there is no length of time, minimum or maximum. The main consideration will be how much time you have remaining in your possible service, right? And remember, if you re-enter the service and that period is less than 5 years, it will not be pensionable. It has to be at least 5 years.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We have Janice asking with regard to officer killed in line of duty, what about the nurses at the psychiatric hospital? And we also have Nigel asking, what about the paramedics in the emergency ambulance service? They're saying that these professions are hazardous as well.
Oh, okay. Well, Like I said when I answered the prison officer, it's just that the query about prison officers. I don't think we ever came across cases of these categories being killed in the line of duty. But if that happened, then you would have to look at the case and see if it meets the requirement.
Okay, I hope that has answered your questions, Janice and Nigel. Thank you, Mr. Hurley. We have time for just one more question, but like I said before, those questions, but we are unable to answer right now. We will compile those questions, send them to Mr. Hurley, and he will endeavor to respond to them within a week of this presentation. So our final question. Okay, so if a person's post is abolished, can they receive gratuity but have to wait until pensionable age to get pension? If a person's post is abolished, then can they have gratuity, but do they have to wait until pensionable age to get the pension?
No, if the post is abolished, the retirement awards there's really not a separation at that point in time. The computation computes your annual pension and your gratuity off the pension. So as long as you're paid the gratuity, you would be paid the pension. But there's one if we recall the retrenchments in 2018, there was a specific legislation which governed that. So there was a category of workers who were paid the gratuity, but they would have to have waited until 60 to receive the pension. But that was kind of specific, right? But like I said, you realize that I would use the word may a lot because a pension is not a right, right? The pension is awarded by the determination of the appropriate commission or the president on the advice of the appropriate service commission, right? If you look at the Pension Act Cap 25, you will see that it specifically says it's not a right.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Well, colleagues, we have reached the end of our Q&A section, or segment rather, and we thank you so very much for your questions. Like I said before, those questions that we were unable to answer, we will endeavor to email those answers, to you within a week. So, Mark, do you have any parting words for us?
Okay. I hope that I have transferred valuable information. Often when I do these sessions, I'm wondering if I've given enough information or if it was clear enough, but I hope so. And as Ms. King is saying, we will also continue to share and to try to transfer our knowledge in the effort to make the process effective when it comes to pensions and gratuities in the public service. I was also looking at some of the questions in the chat and I'm seeing them, but as Ms. King said, we wouldn't have enough time to go through them now, but we will try to get information to you, right? Thank you for your participation, and I hope you have at least learned some useful information this morning.
Thank you, Mark. Colleagues, we have reached the very end of our presentation on awarding retirement benefits under the Pensions Act, Cap 25. On behalf of the Director General, Ministry of the Public Service, and the Director of the Learning and Development Directorate, and of course, our participants, I express sincere thanks to you for taking this time out of your very busy schedule, Mark, to share this very valuable information with us. Also, many thanks to you, colleagues, for joining and participating, and we thank you for your feedback. And you can continue to complete the feedback forms using the link. Last but never ever the least, many thanks as well to my producer, Miss Judy Welch, and the rest of my support team here at the Learning and Development Directorate. Colleagues, until we meet again at our next webinar, perhaps, do have a safe and productive remainder of the day and an enjoyable weekend. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.